All right, folks, I'm going to let people in as they come in, but I just want to introduce myself. Hold on, I lost something I was looking for. There we go. I'm Steve Mitchell. I'm one of the co-owners of Scuppernong Books here in Greensboro. And this is the last in our Nightmares on Elm Street series about horror, which we titled Because Our Story is Actually on Elm Street. And we're really happy to have this panel here tonight. I'm going to let Ian talk about the panel. I just want to introduce Ian and say that Ian McDowell is an award-winning reporter whose most recent book is I Ain't Resisting, The City of Greensboro and the Killing of Marcus Smith. He wrote over 50 articles about the police homicide of Marcus Smith and wrote about the case for the Assembly and the Police Misconduct Civil Rights Law Review. He discovered movie monsters on Shock Theater with Dr. Paul Bearer in Winston-Salem, which he watched on summer weekends at his great uncle's. And he discovered horror fiction in the paperback H.P. Lovecraft collection, The Color Out of Space, bought with lunch money from a drugstore rack after reading in TV Guide that the film Die Monster Die was based on the title story. His own horror fiction has appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Weird Tales, and the year's best horror. We will be taking questions at the end if you want to put them in chat as we go along. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ian. Thank you, Ian, for being here.
Thanks, Steve. My job as moderator is to get out of the way and let these two terrific authors talk to each other. But I did do a short introduction for each. And forgive me if I look that way because I'm looking at my notes on my desktop. But Tananarive is an acclaimed novelist, short story writer, screenwriter, and educator who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She has received the American Book Award, NAACP Image Award, and British Fantasy Award. Her books include the short story collection Ghost Summer and the novels My Soul to Keep and The Good House, among others, and including The Reformatory, of course, which is her new release. She was born in Tallahassee to civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Dew and civil rights lawyer John D. Dew Jr., with her mother, who christened her after the French name for the capital of Madagascar. She co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. She is an executive producer on the Shudder Network's documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. She and her husband collaborator, Stephen Barnes, wrote A Small Town for season 2 of Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone and 2 episodes of the Shudder's anthology film, Horror Noir. They also co-wrote their upcoming Black horror graphic novel, The Keeper, and co-host the podcast Life Writing, Write for Your Life. Victor Lavalle is the author of the short story collection Slap Boxing with Jesus, the novels The Ecstatic, Big Machine, The Devil in Silver, The Changeling, and Lone Women, and the novellas Lucretia and the Croons and The Ballad of Black Tom. The latter, which won the 2016 Shirley Jackson Award and was a finalist for the Bram Stoker, Hugo, Nebula, British Fantasy, and World Fantasy Awards, revisits H.P. Lovecraft's notoriously racist story, The Horror at Red Hook, from the viewpoint of a Black protagonist. He is the creator and writer of the comic books Victor Lavalle's Destroyer and Eve. He has received the British Fantasy Award, the World Fantasy Award, British Fantasy Award, Bram Stoker, Shirley Jackson, American Book Awards, as well as the Key to Southeast Queens. Born in Honolulu to a single mother who immigrated from Uganda, he was raised in Queens, lives in the Bronx, and teaches at Columbia. His novel, The Changeling, was adapted this year for Apple TV Plus as an 8-episode series starring Lakeith Stanfield and narrated by Victor himself. It premiered on September 8th. Sorry, got to scroll down. Tananarive's new novel, The Reformatory, was published on Halloween by Simon & Schuster. Victor's new novel, Lone Women, was published in March by Random House. I've read both, but rather than my quoting the descriptions, I wrote about them while drafting these notes. Let's hear from the authors. Tananarive, let's start with you. Give us the escalator pitch, a term I just made up so that it can be longer than the traditional elevator pitch for The Reformatory, as well as the real-life horror that inspired it.
Well, I call it Jim Crow horror. That's my name for
Mm.
this subgenre. So it is set in the Jim Crow South. It's about a 12-year-old boy from my magical town of Gracetown that I've written about in several of my short stories, who gets in basically the equivalent of a schoolyard scuffle with the son of a very rich white planter in town and ends up incarcerated in the notorious Reformatory, which he's terrified of because he thinks it's haunted. And he thinks that's his biggest problem there. And unfortunately, it is not. And the other protagonist is his 17-year-old sister, Gloria, who's trying to use every method she can to work the so-called system to free her brother. And so basically, it's horror inside and outside, navigating Haints and Jim Crow in 1950.
And now, Victor, can you give us your escalator pitch?
Sure. So my most recent novel is called Lone Women. It's set in 1915, and it's the main character is a Black woman farmer named Adelaide Henry, who flees from California, where she'd grown up homesteading with her mother and father after a terrible tragedy that takes the lives of her mother and father. She travels northeast to Montana, where she hopes to homestead on a plot of land all her own. The only thing she brings with her is a very large steamer trunk. And the problems she faces is every time she opens the steamer trunk, people die.
Excellent.
So that's the book.
Yeah. I know you had some questions for our distinguished guest, co-guest with you. Would you like to just ask her?
Sure.
No?
So just even to explain to everybody, so Tananarive and I are doing this event together, but I'm taking my role as the chance to ask questions of Tananarive, since we're celebrating the release of her novel. Right. So I'm going to ask her some questions. We'll get into our conversation. But I thought maybe the first thing that might be really nice is, if she's up for it, to ask her to read just a little bit from the book.
Why, thank you, Victor, and I will keep it brief. I know we don't have that much time, but I think the best section to sort of convey the combination of sort of childlike experience and wonder. He's a 12-year-old kid at this reformatory, just trying to make his way. And his first ghost encounter is a relatively short excerpt, so I'm going to read it very quickly. This is in the kitchen. Robert has been assigned to the kitchen, which is a plum assignment at the reformatory, but he's had a hard start. He's already felt the ghost of a fire that was at this reformatory years ago, so he's a little bit discombobulated, but he's very happy to finally meet some friends. They exchange names. The tall boy's nickname was Redbone, or just Bone. The smaller boy said he was called Blue because he was blue-black, and he surely was. Robert said his nickname was Robbie, but he wanted to be called Robert. He did not want to be Robbie here. "We'll get you a better nickname," Blue promised him. Redbone and Blue finally got around to instructing Robert on his duties. One sink for plates, one for cups, one for forks and spoons. They only had 2 rules to live by. 1, don't break the dishes. 2, don't leave grime or spots. Boys who made it past washing could start cooking or mopping the floor. Boys who failed at washing dishes got sent out to the fields. Blue had never been to the fields, but Redbone said he'd worked on a thresher and never wanted to see corn on the cob again. Blue's family had sent him to Miami from the Bahamas when he was 8, but he'd been brought to the reformatory after his grandmother died. He was waiting on an aunt to come get him from Bimini, but she kept getting delayed. Redbone gave Robert a knowing look as if to say, "That ain't true." Redbone, who was from St. Augustine, had taken his neighbor's car joyriding when he was 10, and he'd been sentenced to 2 years. His sentence would be up in December, a month before Robert's. He might go home then, or he might get leased out to the peanut mill or one of the farms. He wasn't sure. The warden would decide based on his behavior record. Both boys looked grim at the mention of Warden Haddock. Robert didn't want to talk about him either. Robert listened to their stories between bouts of thoughtful scrubbing. "You're going to need to wash faster than that," Redbone said. 100 years faster, Blue said. That was when Robert looked up and saw him. Across the kitchen, Cleo, the bully, was gone. Instead, a white boy in a chef's hat and long white apron stood in his place. He stared dead at Robert as if he'd been waiting to be noticed. His hair was cut short like Blue's, the color of pale sand. He was thin and barefoot, maybe 12 or 13. Robert looked away fast. When trouble started with white boys, colored boys lost out. I thought it was only colored boys in the kitchen, Robert said. Redbone and Blue shrugged. Well, how come they let him in here like he's spying on us? Redbone and Blue stared blankly, so Robert gestured toward the vat with his chin. The white boy was still there, still staring. What white boy? Redbone said. Robert thought they were teasing him, but their faces said different. They didn't see the boy. They looked straight past him. He's right there, Robert said. You say so, Redbone said, and went back to washing. Robert squeezed his eyes shut tightly, opened them, and looked again. The boy stared on. Robert could see his cool blue eyes from across the room. He had never seen eyes so blue. A tiny clink rang as Redbone lifted a dripping plate he'd rinsed. Just tell him he ain't real. He'll leave you be, he said, most times. Not real. The boy was as real as he was, casting a shadow against the large metal vat. Robert could see his freckles. Blue spoke, hushed. I've seen that white boy. The one with the knife? Heart speeding, Robert checked to see if the boy held a knife. He was relieved to see the boy's hands empty, hanging limply at his sides. He ain't got a knife, Robert said. Must be another one then, Blue said. He checked the plates he'd stacked for chips. White boys must have worked in the kitchen before. They keep coming back, Redbone said. I bet Haints get hungry, huh, Blue? Haints. Robert's heartbeat was thunder, but he couldn't look away. What did he see in this boy's face? He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem quite sad. His eyes reminded Robert of Mama's when she used to cling to his arm to keep him from pulling away when it was too hard to look at her dying. Redbone went on talking to Blue, unbothered. They must be hungry. They're punching open the rice and flour bags at night, and then we get blamed. That ain't right. If you're dead, stay dead, Blue said. They could be talking about rats or roaches. You're not real, Robert whispered to the boy, a test. As if Robert had shouted, the white boy turned to walk away, although he had nowhere to go except the back wall. A butcher's knife was buried in his back, the hilt lodged between his shoulders, blade shining in the light. The circle of blood was thick and black near the knife, soaking red down his back, leaving smudged footprints as he walked toward the wall. One stride and he was gone. Through the whitewashed bricks, Robert gasped. He, Robert clung to the counter to stay upright, his words withered. Yep, he heard Blue say, a tiny voice on the other end of a long tunnel. Told you, Bone, must be the one with the knife. And that's an excerpt from the Reformatory.
So I know, thank you so much, Tananarive. Since we're on Zoom, we can't do this live, but everybody, if we could, a round of applause.
Oh, no,
please,
thank
please.
you. I feel the applause. Do the
If you ever listen to Tananarive's wonderful podcast that she does with her husband, Stephen, they have a soundtrack, and I wish I had the soundtrack to give the applause, the truly
I should have put my
thunderous applause.
on.
Yeah. Okay, but thank you very much for that. So I want to talk definitely about the Reformatory, but if you don't mind, like I'm a sucker for like writers and like their journeys, like how they became the people they are. Right. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to talk a little bit for the people here about like just what your writing journey was. I mean, I know you were a journalist before you were a fiction writer.
Oh, absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I was raised by civil rights activists and probably would have become a lawyer if I'd had any tolerance for the one media law class I tried to take in college, but I couldn't stay awake. I was like, this is not for me. So I'd always wanted to be a writer since I was about 4. I made a little picture book called Baby Bobby. So we're going back that far. And very focused all through junior high. I quit band when I got to high school because I wanted to be super focused on writing. I was taking community college creative writing courses in high school. Was a journalism major because my parents wanted me to have a steady field to rely upon, which was very, very good advice, especially then. maybe not as steady now as it would have been then.
Right.
And, and then I did a what's called a Rotary Foundation scholarship in the UK for my master's degree at the University of Leeds, and they didn't have, I played trumpet, Samantha, which is why there's a trumpet in the Reformatory. But they didn't have an MFA at the University of Leeds, which is where I applied. So I did English literature with a specialty in Nigerian literature, which was a revelation to me. I knew nothing, literally nothing about Nigerian literature. So I ended up studying that. And then I went to work. I was doing the writer thing. I was writing in my spare time, but I was writing short stories. And somewhere along the way, between being a little girl who was writing stories about little Black girls, doing wonderful things, by the time I got out of grad school, I was writing white male characters having epiphanies. So there was no genre in my short stories, and there was no Blackness in my short stories, even gender-wise. For a lot of the stories, I was not present, and I wondered why they weren't selling. I was just sort of skating across the surface of what a short story feels like and looks like, but not really digging in. I had hidden myself from myself in my fiction. This was not a conscious choice. I didn't think, oh, let me write white characters, they'll sell faster. There was none of that. It was literally, I had written myself out of my imagination. And it took, that despite my parents' absolute, not just approval, but my mother gave me a writer's market every year for my birthday. And she loved horror. She's the reason I loved horror. So that genre bias came to me in the academy. And the racial erasure was just the canon. The canon had erased me. And so therefore a story felt like something that was about a white man having an emotional epiphany. That was what a story felt like. And I tried to do that, but I wasn't having a lot of luck until a couple of extraordinary things happened. I read Mama Day by Gloria Naylor, which really taught me, oh, Black women can write the metaphysical, and she's a respected writer. And that really helped open my eyes in terms of how to write. And it was a contemporary story. A lot of the Black literature I had read was historical. In many ways, I'd been running from writing a novel like The Reformatory my whole life. That was not my experience at all. I grew up in the suburbs of Miami. So I loved these stories, but I did not feel like I could fake my way through writing about country life, Right. And that was a lot of what I was reading by the Alice Walkers and Toni Morrisons, who were big when I was coming around. And then the second big thing was interviewing Anne Rice for the Miami Book Fair. And she just, in fact, what she said was so extraordinary. I'm going to just quote it very briefly because I have been giving short shrift to this advice. What she said was so earth-shattering to me, and this was just a telephone interview, was so earth-shattering to me that I had finished writing my first novel 9 months after this interview. That's how earth-shattering it was. And I had just remembered—
This is a great build-up.
Yes, it's a great build-up, and it's going to be worth it because for all these years, I've just been saying, oh, she said her books are taught in colleges, and you can write about big themes when you write about the supernatural. And that was how I kind of glibly was summarizing it. Let me tell you what this woman said to me. She probably sensed that I was a novelist or a writer. I hadn't told her I was. She said, everybody, because I asked her, how do you respond to criticism that you're wasting your talents writing about vampires? And her answer was, everybody knows who Jane Eyre is. Mary Shelley, everybody knows who she is. And everybody knows who Frankenstein's monster is. These are great, powerful, heroic images that really allow you to go outside of yourself, to really talk about questions that change you. That's what Homer did for the people who went down to the corner tavern to listen to him. They didn't know Achilles. They didn't ever see the walls of Troy, but they sat there and listened to him talk about these enormous heroes and these enormous conflicts. And it was not just escape, but it was an escape that improves you. You go back feeling different. And that's what literature should do. Child, I had written my first book less than a year later.
Wow.
Horror
That's
novel
amazing.
Between.
And in the moment,
Oh,
did
indeed.
you, as you say, like it rocked you, but like even in the moment, did you understand, did those words have the effect, or did you, like a day later you wake up, you go, oh my God, like it's
I
rare
knew.
when you get that. You knew instantly.
I knew because when I only looked it up, I even only thought to look up what she said exactly, because with the interview with the vampire series, it just came out on AMC, they had invited me to take part in a panel called Obsessed with the Vampire, which you can find on YouTube. It's a great panel of us talking about it as Black horror, because they made the protagonist Black.
Yeah.
And I just said, let me look up the quote. And it was easy to find, Victor. It was the kicker of the story.
Yeah.
So in journalism, you know, the lead is important. But for me, already having kind of that narrative sensibility, the kicker, I made it the kicker. So that was the thing that left the biggest impression on me, that she said, and I knew it immediately.
Wow. That's great that it's like a superhero origin story, you know, kind of thing. Is like, when did you get hit with the lightning? Yeah, it's an amazing quote. And I love that it also presumes, like, all of it is literature if it affects you.
Yes.
And to not make those distinctions that, say, maybe in the academy are sometimes made about what deserves to be here, what doesn't.
Exactly.
You know? So, all right, I want to pivot from there. Thank you for that. That was like such a great illuminating history of how you got here. But and then so now I want to talk about this book, the wonderful novel, The Reformatory. And just right from the beginning, like before page 1, the book is dedicated to Robert Stevens, among others. Who was Robert Stevens?
Right. Well, right after my mother passed away in 2012, a few months after she passed away, while my family was really deep in mourning, we got word from the Florida State Attorney General's office that she might have had a relative, therefore we had a relative buried on the grounds, potentially, of the Dozier School for Boys. I had never heard of it. I didn't know anything about the Dozier School. When they called, I thought they were talking about another juvenile tragedy from her family history on her mother's side, where she had a great uncle who'd been put to death, electrocuted as a juvenile in Florida. I thought they were calling about that. But no, they were calling about someone I don't think she ever heard about. I don't think her father ever mentioned that he'd had a brother. At least she never mentioned it to me. And I've since met a namesake, sort of another branch of the family tree, who was also related to Robert Stevens, named for him, but never knew his story. So that's really mostly what I can tell you. The real life Robert Stevens died in 1937. He was stabbed by another prisoner there who was brought to trial, apparently. I don't really know much about him beyond that, because when I got this news and we immediately went to the grounds of the school, my father and I, he loved going to meetings. So that was a great family outing for us, a familiar sort of outing for us. And Erin Kimmerly, the researcher from the University of South Florida, was there. She has since written her own book, I think, called We Carry These Bones. And she had worked in war-torn sites like Kosovo to uncover remains. And what you need to understand is the Dozier School had a cemetery on the grounds.
Yes.
First of all, to call it a school is a misnomer. It's a prison. It was really a work camp. And when children died, they were buried out at what was called Boot Hill. Sometimes other children took part in the burials. And often families did not hear that their children had died until later in a letter. They weren't present necessarily at the burial. It was a barbaric setup. They didn't even bother to mark the graves. If you've seen photos of the Dozier School with crosses, those crosses were not from the era. Those crosses were put there many years later by a Boy Scout troop trying to honor the spirits of these lost boys. And from jump, my first meeting, I got to meet survivors, Black and white, strangers, but united old men now by their horrific memories of their abuse at this terrible, terrible institution, most of which was floggings. And, really my worst descriptions of any violence were from real life stories, slightly changed perhaps, but the trip to the infirmary, that's real. That was based on a story of what happened to a real child there who had to go to the infirmary after the beating because it was such a severe beating. And believe me, there were plenty of stories I could not put in a book that is purportedly entertainment, right? Because that's what I think horror is. And but I knew I had to write it somehow. And I didn't want to go down the route of a memoir. I had left journalism behind me, gladly. I had told myself that my memoir with my late mother, would be the last time that I would write nonfiction. It's just a different kind of journey for me, and I don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy writing. I would have written that as a novel if she would have let me. but but so I knew it's like, and I didn't know the 30s. I said, let me take my mother's uncle's story out of 1937, give it a different story. That's not the story I want to write. Let me give it a different story. Let me honor his spirit and honor the suffering of other children at this institution. Set it in 1950, which I chose because it's my mother's childhood era. We talked a lot about that era and writing the memoir. I felt like I knew it better. I did more reading from that era. There's a great book. I mean, it's a horrible book, but it's a great book by Gilbert King called, oh my God, The Devil in the Grove. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize, which is about one of Thurgood Marshall's cases in 1944, I think it was. So it was, I had a great picture in my mind of what Florida was like during that era, just before the Civil Rights era. So we're talking 5 years before Emmett Till, 10 years before my mother would be arrested for the first time in a sit-in and the preceding sit-in in Greensboro. It was a time right before, as a contemporary reader, we know these great changes were about to happen, at least on the surface. But the truth of the matter is, I could have set this book in 1900, 1920, or 1950, and much of it would be exactly the same. And if I could set it in 1880, a lot, except for technology, in terms of social customs and segregation and Jim Crow, a lot of it would be exactly the same.
Right.
So that's the world they're living in. And in order to make it a more gentle read, although readers say it's not that gentle, but in order to make it, believe me, it's a lot more gentle than hearing these real stories from these real people. I added the ghosts. Because it would be dishonest to write a book about a child at the Reformatory without hints of the horror of why so many people know the name of this place now, and in the Alabama Industrial School for Boys, and the indigenous schools in Canada, and the schools for unwed mothers in Ireland, or, I mean, around the world, where children are at their most vulnerable. They so often are preyed upon by their so-called caretakers. And that was another part of my research, Victor, because I wanted this to be in conversation with the present, and mass incarceration is kind of my pet issue. And frankly, now there isn't much different if your child is in a schoolyard fight. Sometimes these children are being sent to juvenile hall, and are being sentenced to juvenile hall, and suddenly you're having to get a lawyer, especially if your child is brown or Black. And there's nothing you can do about that, just like in 1950. And yeah, so it's in conversation with the present in a lot of ways that I hoped people would understand, because there's a lot of work to do to actually root out the vestiges of slavery and Jim Crow.
Well, as you say, like I certainly was thinking about the modern day comparisons, right? And the part of the horror of the sort of just the economic factor of it all, right? Like you wrote some great blog posts about the research you've been doing that I would recommend everybody go check out. Maybe the next time Tananarive's answering questions, I can put them in the chat. I can put the links in the chat. But one of the quotes you have at the start is from, I guess, the equivalent of the warden of the Dozier School, saying basically, we don't have enough boys to
bring in the
crops. This is going to be a problem. And all of a sudden, of course, suddenly there were a lot more crimes.
It's like pretty much a private prison. I mean, they would pay families even from what I understand. One woman I interviewed said that her family paid to turn her brother over to the Reformatory. I mean, it's just, and yeah, they grew, I think, 40% of the corn in that county. They had the printing press for the county. There's this really insidious veneer over the horrors in that place, because on one level, it was a celebrated school. It was football. You know, one guy who wrote a memoir said that he was kept for a long time there because he was a football star, you know, and so the image of that place was very important to the people who ran it. And the town was very, very sensitive to criticism, even now.
Yeah.
Very sensitive to criticism because so many of literally them worked there or their parents worked there. It was a huge part of this community. The former mayor, the first Black mayor of Marianna we interviewed, had worked there. It was just a huge economic part of this town, what we would call today too big to fail.
Right.
And I say there's a correlation between that and our criminal justice system as a whole. Like it's a big system. My dad knew a sheriff in Gadsden County, Florida, who started a great program. That's my mom's hometown, was a lot of the model for my fictitious Gracetown, as well as Marianna, which is where the real Dozier School was. And he had the Black men in that county were going through the jail system. So as a Black sheriff, he wanted to make a difference, and he set up systems to help people avoid going back, and he literally got in trouble. So it's an economic system, and when people try to reform it, they get pushback, which is how this Hell House was open between 1900 and 2011. 2011,
Right.
They shut it down, and it was fraught with complaints, like almost from the day it opened. It's still nothing would shut it down. Even the fire I wrote about, I don't think 25 boys necessarily died, but many of the boys died in an actual fire, which was either negligence or something else.
Right. Well, but if those lives are valued far less than the labor, right, then nobody's going to.
It's a horrific, and that's why it took me 7 years to write this. And
I'm only laughing at the cat. I'm not laughing at anything else.
Oh, okay.
I'm laughing at the cat nibbling the ear.
I was looking around for my cat.
Just because we're talking about something so horrific, and I was like, I don't want anybody to think I'm smiling about that.
No,
I'm just
but
smiling about Ian's cat.
Kendra Parker had a great note in chat about Octavia's process for kindred. And, one thing does strike me. I had an opportunity to meet Octavia a few times. Steve, my husband, Stephen Barnes, was a very good friend of hers. And in talking to her and reading about her, I have often thought to myself, wow, if writing was as hard for me as it seemed to be to Octavia, the way she described writing and how she had to fight past medication, she had to fight past illness, she had to fight. I mean, it didn't sound like she had fun. Like for me, I often consider writing to be fun. I mean, sometimes it just feels like typing in the beginning. I hate outlining, I hate pitching. But when I'm actually writing a scene, that is my happy place. That has been my happy place since I was a kid. And that was not kicking in when I was working on the Reformatory.
Yeah.
Because the research was just the worst. I mean, I'm not even in a Zoom, I don't want to talk about the worst stories I heard.
Yes.
But just to think that it's children and as old men, they're still traumatized by what happened to them for whatever period of time they were there. Just heartbreaking. And I was raising a son when we first went to the site. Not the first time, but on a subsequent visit, my dad and my husband and my son were out with me, and Jason was about 9. And it was a photo op when they were beginning exhumations officially. And it was, the University of South Florida was doing press conferences and all this. We thought Jason would want to go home, but he wanted to stay, and he ended up digging. And I part of it, yes, he was having fun. He was digging, but I think also he could not help but understand that this was a very important and sober moment because it's children. So my son is literally the age of the boy I'm writing about. And although I was far more gentle with him than a lot of the stories I heard, it's still, I mean, there are chapters I have trouble. There's a scene at the Funhouse, which I was writing up to. Like, I'm going to write up to the scene in the Funhouse. And it took me a long time to crawl my way there. And it's like year after year after year, I'm putting it off and crawling. And I finally got to that scene, and I made it a standalone chapter in the Boston Review. I sold it as a short story because that's something I tell my students: establish IP, especially if you're taking forever writing a novel. Don't wait 7 years for the world to know who you are. Take an excerpt, publish it. So I did that, and I tried reading that excerpt once at a reading, and I will never read it again. It's not it's not the kind of scene that you want to read out loud. It's the horror, like the horror is almost encapsulated in that moment. But then it was like an exhalation let me get to the rest of the story. It's not that there aren't other difficult things that happen, but that was a really hard moment for me to write up to, because I was thinking about Robert, the real life Robert Stevens. I was thinking about my son. And of course, as a writer, you fall in love with your characters. And of course, I was falling in love with Gloria and Robert. And with good reason, I'll say. Gloria was based very much on my mother. That's the last thing I want to say. I really, that family background of civil rights activism, the influence of my parents is all up in this book, because the civil rights attorney, John Dorsey, is literally based on my father, John Dorsey Dew. It's earlier than when he was practicing. He wouldn't be practicing for another, 13 or 14 years after that. But he actually helped me come up with how to write a scene in the judge's chamber, because I'm like, what do you say to a Jim Crow judge? The law is against you, and it's not even applied fairly. So what exactly can you say to this judge? And he actually told me what he used to say, and this is what worked for us. And that was fascinating. But also Gloria, even though my mother had passed away before I ever heard about her uncle, I wanted Gloria, because I knew, boy, if she had lived, she would have been a firebrand to join the other survivors and raise hell about this place. They'd probably have reparations now. But because she had passed away and I couldn't share the journey with her, I wanted to make her a part of the journey. And the question I asked myself at every turn was, what would my mom have done? Because she was a firebrand at 17. I honestly believe she would have done everything that Gloria did in this book if she'd had the opportunity, or there's some things that happen that are a little more dramatic than happen in the real world, but she would have been all over it. She's fearless. And to protect her family, there's nothing she wouldn't have done.
Well, I have a couple more questions, but I just want to remind everybody that we're nearing the time when we might shift into the Q&A part of things. So if you do have questions, I know there's a couple there already, but if there's questions you want to put into the chat for Tananarive to answer or discuss, please feel free to do so. So after what you've said there about the true horrors of the things, I feel like the thing I do want to say to the folks who are here is one of the things I found so miraculous about the book is that it is still, despite all that, it is not a hopeless book. It's actually a very hopeful book. I would say, like, the way, if it was nonfiction, I mean, considering literally the narrative of Robert Stevens' life, perhaps it would have been a book that was just full of too much despair, right? And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like how the choice for some degree of hopefulness, happiness, positivity, and that as a conscious choice.
That, I think, is just by chance, because this is the first novel I've written with child protagonists. That just dawned on me. I've written tons of short stories with child protagonists, to the point where there was a child on the cover of my collection, Ghost Summer, and I was like, why is there a child on the cover of this book? And they said, well, look at the story. So I think it's the thing that made Robert such a great protagonist that provides the hope. And that is his innocence, his childlike innocence. Even in the wake of the most horrible events, like all children, in fact, like your eye is like looking for things to play with. You're my age, I'm your age, can we be friends? Like, he's still at that age, which is a very tender age, and was what made it so heartbreaking to write it in terms of the way they treated these children. But he still finds ways to maintain his childlike nature. And even listening to the audiobook, which oh my God, I highly, highly recommend. Janice Abbott Pratt. Woo, she put her foot. I heard her do Lone Women, which is also an excellent book. And the children, some of them I did not like very much, but she does great children's voices. And it is, like, to me, almost surreal how good the children's voices are on this audiobook. Like, I wrote it and I'm just captivated listening to these children talk to each other, because her Robert voice is dead on, and her Blue, I mean, just all of it. But what that represents is that's why they can still see the ghosts. They haven't crossed over to adulthood. Gloria's sensitivities are more faint because she's older, she's closer to adulthood. He's still retains that creative spirit, that childlike spirit that some of us, a lot of us, shrug off when we go into adulthood. We forget we used to like to draw. We used to like to play music. We used to like to write. Although thank God I haven't forgotten that I like to write, but I have forgotten I like to draw. I never draw. I drew all the time when I was a kid. So it's that gives, I think, the book the hope. That's his superpower, is that he has this incredible emotional resilience. And when he decides, I mean, he also is fearless, like his sister.
Yeah.
And really the most fun part for me was writing a friendship between a living person and a haint. Frenemyship, I guess I'll call it. And I won't spoil how that happens, but that was also intriguing and fun for me, because even though the haint is a trickster and, you know, out for himself and all the things you would think a haint would be, he's still a child too. And that energy between them, that playfulness, even if it's sometimes a hard playfulness between them, to me is, I think, what represents the hope.
And I appreciate it there as well. Yeah, just that the haint, particularly as you say, because they were kids, that you were able to make even that complex, as opposed to maybe what I'm more used to, of the idea of, like, certainly you were never going to be friendly with a haint. You were never going to help a haint, right? Like, but I appreciated that the book complicated that as well, you know, very much. So I want to start to shift, if I can. I feel like, Shanna, I feel like we answered your question. Shanna asked, I'm wondering what it's like for you balancing or softening the real life horror with the supernatural horror. I'm hoping that feels like that question was answered. And that's also my sister's name.
The use of ghosts, that was it.
Yes, I hope so. So, okay, so the next question is, what character that you have written helped you grow as a writer?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, you know, I'd have to go back a few years, I think, to answer that in the most honest way. I think it would have to be Dawit in my African Immortal series that began with My Soul to Keep, because from like page 1, I was so intimidated by this idea that I'm supposed to be writing a character who's an immortal. Like, I was 27 or 28. I was just out of college. I wasn't married. In my mind, I had experienced nothing. So how the hell am I supposed to write a character who's 500 years old? And I think that was a challenge I was constantly trying to live up to in that 4-book series. I had to learn about world events. I had to learn about world history. I had to really dig in. And in a lot of ways, I think that was a primer for the more research intensive books I would be writing later, like Joplin's Ghost. I had to do a lot of research into history for that. My mother's memoir, The Black Rose. So it was good practice for me.
Okay, great. So the next question is, how difficult was it to obtain the biennial school records and other state records, and how did you navigate this? I ask because I faced significant pushback while I researched Alabama schools.
Oh, I can only imagine. See, you're a real researcher, and bless you. But that was like not I was very, very lucky that the University of South Florida had already done so much of that work. Aaron Kimmerly, who also had son Robert's age when we first talked about it, seemed to really take this personally. And there's a very detailed report about the Dozier School that was my starting point in terms of research, which is where that quote Victor read is from, about the superintendent complaining about the crops coming in too slow. So grad students had already done a great deal of research into the Dozier School period, including the Robert Stevens record. She was the repository for that. She told me, I will share this. In the story, Robert Stevens has an earache in the novel, because I'm paying homage to the fact that the real life Robert Stevens had a very, very bad ear infection, apparently. And the reason we know this all these years later is that she told me that when they did find the remains, the evidence of the ear infection was actually apparent in his skull. That's how bad an ear infection it was. And I'm like, oh, see, that's why I couldn't put the worst stories in. But I wanted to this is an homage to his spirit. Maybe if someone's done the research, they'll be like, oh, the earache. Okay. But that to me was just homage. I did not dig in to try to find out more about the real Robert Stevens. That was a decision I made almost immediately, because I knew almost immediately that that wasn't the story I wanted to tell at all. Okay, it was not. And I wanted him to be younger than 15 because he would be more empathetic as a younger child. 15-year-olds are still children, but especially when it comes to Black boys, I saw that with my own son. There's a point at which strangers think your child is cute, and then that goes away.
Yep.
So I wanted him to still be in that phase where nobody could look away from it. And there were very young children there. So that was not fictionalizing Dozier at all. They went up to the age of 21, but some of them were quite young.
So the next question says, I just read The Wishing Pool and was thrilled to see Naima again, a character I fell in love with in the very first things I read by you, the Apocalypse Triptych stories.
Oh, great.
Do you have any plans to pull the Naima stories together into a collection or a novel sometime?
Thank you for asking that. A lot of people have asked if I plan to write. Naima, by the way, is a plague survivor. And this triptych came out before COVID. So I had written at least 3 stories set during a plague or after a plague. And people were asking me if I was, foretelling COVID. It's like, no, I've just always been fascinated by plague. And no, I never did see her as being a novel character. I don't know why. I wrote 3 stories about, actually, I've written probably 5 stories about her now. But for some reason, I feel satisfied with that. And I'll contrast that to a short story I wrote called Incident at Bear Creek Lodge, which just won a World Fantasy Award, which I was so excited about. I wrote a sequel to that story for Ellen Datlow's Christmas and Other Horrors called originally Return to Bear Creek Lodge. But that story, I definitely feel like I can't wait to start writing it as a novel. So I don't know why Naim is not speaking to me that way. It could just be that there's something about a plague stripped world that does not feel like the place I would want to live in for that long. I think that
especially now. Yes. All right, I'm going to dive to the next one. I'm currently reading The Good House with my ears. Yay, audiobooks.
Oh, Robin Miles.
And I think, yes, Robin Miles did such an incredible job, particularly with bringing the character of Grandma Marie to life for me. Can you talk more about your experiences with the audio versions of your work? What's your role during or before or after the recording process?
I love that question because I am a proud audio reader. And whenever I hear that debate, is audio really reading? I'm like, am I having an experience with these characters? Am I immersed in this story? Then yes, yes, it is. I get it. I mean, I have my books and I love my books, but audio is washing the dishes, commuting. It can occupy a different reading space than traditional reading can. And I love listening to my audiobooks. It's like the only way I can re-engage with my stories creatively. Because the Reformatory is a great example. It seems to me like it was only yesterday that I was still working on it. And I hate to say this because of the great AI debate that's happening right now, but there's a program called Voice Stream where I can upload my manuscript and have a voice read it to me while I was walking that night. So I'd write during the day and listen during the night. And that was literally a part of my process to get through the end of this book. So when I got a chance to actually hear Janice Abbott-Pratt's version of this, it takes me away from the page, because even in audio, you're like, I should have cut that line. It like takes you out of the story, right? I can't read it without being taken out of the story. I am completely, it's like copy editing for that draft that you never get to turn in. Whereas audio, it's transporting. It's like the closest thing to an adaptation, until those horror noir adaptations that Steve and I did of my story, The Lake, and our story, Fugue State, I had never had an adaptation. So audiobooks were it. Audiobooks were the closest I could get to communing with an actor and someone who was interpreting my work. And if you like audio, let me tell you, Peter Francis James did an amazing job with My Soul to Keep and The Living Blood. The accents I made him do, I mean, just amazing. And Robin Miles, oh my God, otherworldly. And you should listen to the audiobook of the new Jordan Peele anthology out there, Screaming. Robin Miles also reads a story by Nalo Hopkinson that is so spot on that I kept wondering, is that Nalo reading her own story? She captured her.
Beautiful. All right, this comes from Nicholas. I only say that because he begins with, I met you a few weeks ago. And I want to say thank you again for writing this book. It's an important work and masterpiece.
Oh,
Question, what advice would you give for a teacher who teaches 5th grade writing? How do I get my students engaged in writing?
That's a great question. And I can only go in and ask my 5th grade self that question, because that was when I was writing like handwritten stories on wide ruled paper, adventures about a girl named Tilly who was trying to get into the Book of World Records. In junior high, I was writing fan fiction, so I could like delight my friends with a short story about them getting to meet Sean Cassidy. I never got the attraction, but whatever. Or myself into fan fiction with Randolph Mantooth and Emergency. Shout out to my Gen Xers out there. But I think that's one way. Imaginary meetings with their favorite celebrities. I think that can be a fun way to get. That's how I started. And also adventures like science fiction. I think children have a natural interest in science fiction and fantasy stories. And a prompt to imagine yourself on a spaceship. You've stowed away on a spaceship. Why are you there? What do you, just to dream of like these crazy scenarios. And I think a lot of kids can really relate to that because they're natural storytellers. They're already coming up with stories with their G.I. Joes and their Barbies. So just transfer that to the page.
Yeah. Next question is, how many hints do you have to give the reader to show that a quote unquote good character is actually evil in the end? Can you talk about your literary tricks to make surprise endings credible?
Interesting. How many hints? That's up to the reader, isn't it? I mean, I honestly was shocked when I published My Soul to Keep. Because, I mean, I don't know how many of you read My Soul to Keep, but let's just say, first of all, he had never told his wife he was an immortal, so he was keeping this a secret, their whole marriage. He put their family in tremendous danger, and there's a super big tragedy at the end of that book that you could pretty much lay at his feet. And I had kind of washed my hands of him, and readers loved him. Some of y'all today love him. And I was like, what does he have to do? And, one of the things, one of the mantras in that book, and Kira says it is, are there any good monsters? And I think that's the thing. First of all, in real life, there's rarely any such thing as a true monster. Even that ice pick killer guy who chilled me and the HBO documentary, when someone asked about his daughter, I mean, the emotion, I mean, the anger he felt, that's emotion. He loves his daughter, right? He loves her. And so everybody, no matter how bad they are, that was a lesson I was practicing in My Soul to Keep. I wanted people to at least understand why Jessica would have stayed with him so long. That was really all I was going for, is like, why didn't she just walk out the door immediately? It's like, well, it's not that easy, boo, because she's been married to this man for 10 years. They have a child. She loves him. And here's why she loves him. And you're going to love him too. And I just didn't realize I would love him so much. So even the worst character in this book, Warden Haddock, I was halfway just amusing myself, but honestly, so that I could create him as a credible character, and he does briefly have point of view chapters, I have to make him a real person and have a real history. And because he's so outside of humanity he's a sociopath, I believe is the path he is. Because he's so outside of humanity, he's also kind of outside of some of the racial attitudes of his time. He's not bogged down by what people on Main Street think about Black people. He's made up his own mind about what he thinks about Black people. So I'm not going to say he's a progressive, but he's also not as traditionally racist as some of the other nice characters in this story, nicer anyway, characters in this story.
All right, next question I have here. Sorry, I was just looking up a thing that is relevant to this question. It says, I'd love to hear you both talk about the role of place in your horror. Characters in Lone Women become detached from one place, attached to a new place, while Robert seems at the beginning to be experiencing something like stone tape. Do you know what stone tape is?
No.
I looked it up. It says the stone tape theory is the speculation that ghosts and hauntings are analogous to tape recordings, and that mental impressions during emotional or traumatic events can be projected in the form of energy, quote unquote, recorded onto rocks and other items and replayed under certain conditions.
I love that theory.
I love that. Yeah.
First of all, I almost want to let you answer first, Victor, but I don't want to lose track now that I've learned what a stone tape is.
Please
Follow
go,
what
because
this
the kitchen
is,
scene
but-
is kind of that idea already. The scene you read.
What is?
The kitchen scene, I mean, there's a way that
yes.
before you understand that what
Yeah.
his abilities are, it does feel like, oh, this place is holding on to these ghosts.
Right.
Like,
Right.
which seems to be that theory.
I don't know if I actually wrote it in the book, but at one point when we were doing some TV development, it gets confusing after quite that we came up with the line Gracetown soil remembers.
Yeah.
And this is sort of this idea that the reason the soil is this color is because of the blood, right? In orange, in northern Florida, southern Georgia, you get the soil with this orange color. And it's kind of this idea that there's blood in the soil, which would explain why Gracetown itself draws so much strange energy. It's on some kind of it has some kind of a strange energy around it that affects the children in all my Gracetown stories, including the Reformatory. And yes, I do get into some sort of intricacies about why he can see ghosts of strangers he's never met, when the one ghost he really would like to see look like in real flesh, the way these other ghosts look, is his mother, who died the year before. And that's kind of one of the heartaches, is he can see other ghosts, but he can't see her, and he can't see her because she's never been there. And the only way he can sense her at all is because she's drawn to him as the object that's the stone, basically, in that analogy. You go on, Victor.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, for me, I'm from Montana, I'm from Queens, New York. So I did a lot of research in particular about Montana and the sort of the desolation of the space, but also the way that the place is it that the place is so empty that it feels a little, or it seems so empty that it feels a little haunted, in that way that isolation makes us feel that. Or are we bringing our haunting with us, right, to this place? And in a way, because there's so little distraction, we can't help but finally have to confront the ghosts that we brought. So that was, for me, that was the idea, was like the landscape in some way mirrored Adelaide's sort of inner life. And that I often try to, whether it's like a room that a character's in, or a locale where the story takes place, I often try to say to myself, how can this room reflect how this person's feeling at this moment? And that doesn't mean it just the things you describe, the tone you use is meant to give you greater insight about the character, as opposed to just being a literal objective description of a space, so that's usually for me the way I try to take it.
I could listen to, honestly, a whole hour's interview of you talking about Lone Women, which, so by the way, let's give that a hand. And also, I've known it since it was a short story.
That's right, yeah.
And what was the name of that?
It was called Long Hidden.
Long Hidden. It was like
Yes.
marginalized speculative fiction, and he wrote a short story version of it. And I emailed you immediately and said, I love this. And you said you were working on a novel. You made us wait long enough, Victor.
I sure took a while. Yes. But I appreciate that. And I would say, like, broadly speaking, like, that whole anthology is wonderful.
Really good.
Yeah. So, but I think that actually takes us like to time. So I guess what I will say on behalf of, I hope everyone here is, Tananarive, thank you for writing this book. It's just such a wonderful work of fiction.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I feel lucky that I got to be a part of this conversation.
Well, and congratulations to you. I'm still blown away that you got an adaptation to TV, and you get to, you have like raised the bar for like adaptation so high now, and love it.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Tananarive, and thank you, Ian. Thank you all for being here. And thanks to everyone out there in the ether of Computerland who have joined us. We really appreciate you being here this evening with us. We're going to go now. We're going to make this video available on the Scuppernong Books YouTube in the next couple of days. So if you know someone who wanted to be here and missed it, or if you want to see it again, you can see it there at Scuppernong Books on our YouTube channel. Thanks again to everyone.
Thank you for having me. Good
Have a
night.
Thank you,
great evening.
Ian. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.